First, when the presenter's done, you can enter your questions into the chat window. And then if the presenters could read the question so that the question can get recorded into the recording, that would be great. Each presenter will have roughly 15 minutes to present, a little few minutes afterwards for questions and answers. And then I think that's about it. So first up, we have Marcos. And whenever you're ready, Marcos, you can begin.
All right, good morning, everyone. Thank you for attending. My name is Marcos Ortiz. My capstone project I'll be presenting today is from Tehran to Target, spatially analyzing Iran's ballistic missile program. Just a little personal introduction. I myself am a military intelligence officer in the U.S. Army. I serve in the 82nd Airborne Division. I conduct tactical level intelligence, which is not as cool as it sounds on TV. For the introduction for this project, the purpose of this project is spatially analyze the Iranian ballistic missile program's ability to conduct precision missile strikes on critical infrastructure within the Middle East. The project only measures the strict capability and does not consider air defense artillery countermeasures. This project is important because it explains a major part of Iran's strategic military options to project power and influence in the Middle East. The bluff for this project is that I quantified how many missiles Iran would need to launch to confidently hit critical infrastructure and determining if that quantity is realistic. This allows us to spatially analyze where in the Middle East can Iran feasibly target with ballistic missiles. This would answer the research question, how feasible would an Iranian missile strike be to severely damage or destroy critical infrastructure throughout the Middle East? In order to complete this project, I needed to first find the probability of a successful missile strike. That is one single missile hitting one single target successfully. Secondly, I needed to find how many missiles would be needed to confidently strike a target. Here, this means how many missiles it would take to say Iran would have a 75% chance of success. Third, I needed to find generally where in the Middle East Iran would not be able to confidently strike to show the limitations of the ballistic missile program. Over the summer, the Iran-Israel conflict caused significant losses to Iran's ballistic missile program. Understanding the current limitations explains their future options. Due to the long-term sanctions on Iran, they have not been able to attain a modernized air force. Iran gets around this with a substantial missile program. This allows them to project power throughout the region without sustaining considerable risk to their own forces. This graphic depicts the range of Iran's missile systems, showing they could range the entire Middle East if launched at their borders. They use mobile launchers and solid propellant missiles to support this with complex missile systems. The gap in capability lies in the difference between the short-range ballistic missiles and the medium-range ballistic missiles. SRBMs, the short range, have ranges under 1,000 kilometers, while MRBMs, the medium range, extend past but under 3,000 kilometers. For this project, I used missiles they have used in recent history, publicly available information from their specifications. A limitation of this project is relying on publicly available and debated information on the missile systems. Previous literature emphasizes the ballistic missile program as part of Iran's national identity, which explains their past need to retaliate with the ballistic missile program no matter the outcome. After the U.S. bombed their nuclear facilities, Iran notified the U.S. where they were going to retaliate with missiles so they can hold on to their identity without escalating a conflict. Secondly, the BMP, or ballistic missile program, is necessary due to Iran's lack of an air force. They cannot simply be replaced by the drones because the missiles are more reliable at getting past the air defense bubbles throughout the region. Third, Iran's missiles are inaccurate due to technological constraints, partially because of the sanctions placed on them throughout history and the lack of presence in the space domain. Lastly, despite losses in recent conflict with Israel, and attempts at disarmament from the West, Iran will retain their ballistic missile program due to its importance to their identity and strategic deterrence military doctrine. So, despite their losses, they will continue to rebuild it. The gaps in the literature that this project it seeks to eliminate are uh, the current capabilities to strike individual infrastructure, and secondly, where are which countries and infrastructures are vulnerable to strikes on the individual infrastructure. The data from this project comes from publicly available sources. To find limitations to the ballistic missile program, I used example infrastructure of different sizes and types in each country to use as a potential strike targets. The loss of these kinds of infrastructure would cause instability in these countries. It is by no means exhaustive, and not every single infrastructure within a country. That's just outside of the scope of this project. Next is the data set on the missile specifications. This is the most significant limitation to this project, being that it comes from only publicly available missile data. To mitigate this issue, I used the most likely three types of missiles that Iran would use uh, that have been observed in recent history. So we have observed KEP values, which would describe their accuracy. Here's a flowchart of my methodology. First, I found the lethal radius of the missile used. Then I determined the effective lethal radius, which is the most restrictive value between the target radius and the missile lethal radius. This allows me to complete the project objectives of determining the probability of a single missile hitting the target, then finding how many missiles it would take to hit the target confidently, and finding which infrastructure throughout the region is not feasible to strike. The methodology is done using a model that I constructed in ArcGIS that runs the infrastructure point data from that I previously shown. Uh, each has a target radius in their attribute table, and I run that through a series of equations in the model. To describe that in more depth, first is the lethal radius calculation. This equation in the model finds the lethal radius of the missile using a cube root scaling law equation on the weight of the payload and a constant that determines the building hardiness of a regular building. That's that 22.2 there. Next is the effective lethal radius equation. Here it is simply determining which is smaller, the lethal radius or the target radius. And the reason for this is if you imagine if the edge of a target radius is hit by the edge of a missile payload, that in real life that would not be a very successful strike. So to refine the model, this equation restricts it limits the target to the physical dimension of the actual target itself. If the payload is smaller than the target, it will lower the effective radius, which in turn would reduce its probability and increase the amount of missiles needed for a successful strike. To find the probability of a successful strike, this equation is based off the effective lethal radius and the circular error probable. That's that KEP value I mentioned earlier. And that's a radius where 50% of the missiles fired at a target are expected to land within. This is a Rayleigh's distribution. If you remember that as like a bell curve that you may see around in statistics, uh, where half of them of all the missiles are in the first half of the graph there, and the rest, well, most of them will be within the around the radius of the cap. The rest would space out uh, not necessarily infinitely, but that's what it would look like on the graph there. The point of that is just that this is the most common way to measure a missile's accuracy. It's going to be within mostly a certain radius. Next, we find the quantity of missiles needed. So for this, the top value is if we think of it as our failure budget. This is a maximum amount of risk we can afford for the missile strike. Or if they want a 75% confidence that it'll be successful, then 25% is the maximum amount we're willing to assume for it being unsuccessful then. And then the bottom is the probability of a successful strike for a single missile. We're dividing the top, that failure budget, by the bottom being the cost, and that finds the number which we round to be the total number of missiles it would take to have a 75% confidence. And the reason why we use the 75% confidence that the strike would be successful is based on the Intelligence Community Directive 203, uh, which is the guideline for expressing confidence. Here, 75% is a good number that fits within the likely confidence that a strike would be successful. And lastly, uh, to identify the limitations of the missile program, I symbolize infrastructure as feasible with less than 30 missiles, feasible with less than 100 missiles, or not feasible with less than 100 missiles. Previous strikes against a single target most often use less than 30 missiles, and examples of critical targets seen over the summer likely use close to 100 missiles. There are no examples of a single target receiving fire from more than 100 missiles, and all of those include missiles shot down before hitting their target. The results of this project, uh, shown here, are that I found Iran's capabilities to confidently strike single targets in the Middle East diminish sharply after exceeding SRBM range. This allows them to place precision strikes on most countries in the region. This graphic and those after have the symbols dispersed only after going through the model, and this is just to show more clearly uh, the symbols being affected here. It's just after the longest range SRBM that the targets become non-feasible. Where the targets remain feasible are in MRBM range are just the larger targets, like the power plants and oil refineries and water sanitation areas. Uh, you see that the Kiam is their longest ranging short range ballistic missile. So anything after that range, they'd have to use medium range ballistic missile like the EMAD, which is part of the Shabab family. It is one of the more accurate ones, and we've seen it used in the Israel conflict. And it just has a much lower accuracy value than the Kiam and other short range ballistic missiles like the Kiam. Without advances in the missile technology to improve accuracy, like space-based capabilities, Iran will have a difficult time targeting specific infrastructure and medium-range ballistic missile. This graphic shows that most countries in the Middle East remain very feasible for Iran to target critical infrastructure. The lighter pink shaded countries have a reduced, but not completely, risk to critical infrastructure. Uh, so here we see in the lighter pink areas that most of that population there is going to be in Egypt, but significant targets we remember are mostly in Israel, and this shows that they cannot be hit as reliably. So in conclusion, Iran can feasibly strike infrastructure in every country within SRBM range, which limits those countries' strategic options. And the countries with infrastructure that is unlikely to be struck are still susceptible to Iranian missile strikes on population centers. This is to say that just because their critical infrastructure isn't as likely to be hit by a single target missiles, that doesn't mean that the country would not be struck by missiles as we've seen in the past, but rather that Iran would have to utilize different strategies than firing directly from their country, or they would fire into population centers, which we have seen in the past. Other options are that Iran would have to use proxy groups, like they have given missiles to the Houthis in Yemen, which would be able to range targets like in Israel. Uh, this project scope was more towards the borders of Iran itself. So as an option for direct conflict between two countries there, They're severely limited beyond SRBM range. Uh, Pending any questions, that concludes my project, and I have my references right here.
All right, thanks, Marcos. Great job.
Let me open up the chat window.
Yeah. While we wait for a question or two to pop up, I have a general question here. So, is there some kind of a priority or targeting priority that Iran goes through? In other words, we'll always target, I don't know, oil refineries first, and then we'll do hospitals second, or is there such a priority list they go through?
So, sir, they in the past have stated that the limitations are more so that the air defense bubble, and their strategy would be to overwhelm the air defense bubbles, like the Iron Dome seen in Israel. They stated if they wanted to really get to the entire West, and including Israel there, it would be they would launch a substantial strike with over 500 missiles towards all the oil refineries. This project and literature in the past have shown that it's not very doable. And Iran's own officials have talked about how they should not overstate their own capabilities because it would lead them to not put more R&D towards realistic outcomes for themselves.
And I guess kind of as a follow-up to your last slide or your next to last slide, who is helping the technological side of their missile program?
So the in-depth answer to that is a little beyond the scope of publicly available information. However, things we've seen in the past is that some of their missiles are supported with technology from North Korea.
Hmm.
Uh, there is technological sharing with China. We've seen developments of you may have seen the news recently of mixed use part or dual use technology being seized by the United States from China to Iran. That dual use, it could be things like capacitors and semiconductors that could be used in the computer systems of ballistic missiles.
All right. Well, need to move forward here. Um, we do have one question for you.
Uh, it doesn't seem like that's a question for me directly.
It says from Michelle, may have missed this. What's coming next for your project?
For my project in
Y
specific,
yes.
uh, I would like to apply this at work. Uh, and as an intelligence officer, I would be able to take this to work, specifically the model, and share that we have the capability of understanding what can affect us directly as a brigade size element, which is more of a not so much a city, but a brigade would be in charge of if we had to deploy against a specific part of a city, that would be our zone of responsibility. And then I could be able to convey risk to us from extended range missiles compared to, well, normally people are more concerned about drones because they're right there, but a country's ability to uh, strike at us from afar would elevate the issue to our division as opposed to the brigade. So communicating that risk to the brigade allows them to better support us with their air defense assets.
All right. If you could put your contact, your email information in the chat window in case someone wants to follow up with you, that'd be great.
All right, thank you so much.
Thank you. Christopher is up next. So if you want to start sharing your screen, we can get that put in place.
Good afternoon. Give me 1 second here. All right, can you see my screen?
Yes, we can, and we can hear you. So whenever you're ready, you can begin.
All right, thank you very much. All right, my project was analyzing change in crime clusters in the Philadelphia metropolitan area from 2017 to 2023. This is my capstone project. It's good to hear from y'all. All right, let's get right into it. Uh, I am Christopher Huff. I'm waiting the onboarding for Strawhan Environmental Inc. For GIS specialist position. They're a company that's based out of Maryland. I'll be working remote in Hallstown, PA. Um, Currently, I'm working as a deli associate at a local giant, so that's been fun. This project is identifying clusters of violent crime in Philadelphia, PA, and creating maps of the clusters from 2017 to 2023. Previous research shows the FBI defines violent crime as murder, rape, robbery, and aggravated assault. Um, Philadelphia was part of a high violent crime cluster, which means it had significant high violent crime with the city of Camden during Johnson et al.'s study in 2015, indicating a positive local spatial autocorrelation. And during the summer of 2020, there was a record wave of violent crime across the U.S., according to Udall in 2023. The data I used came from Open Data Philly. It was crime point incidents of crime from the Philadelphia police. I pulled the incident data from 2017 to 2023. The data needed cleaning as there was multiple null values. I showed a example of that on this slide. I focused on violent crimes as defined by the FBI, which is murder, rape, robbery, and aggravated assault. And I grouped those crimes together in a single class to make it easier to sort through. I also used block groups in Philadelphia for the to aggregate into spatial correlation and population data to aggregate the data. For the method, I used ArcGIS Pro. I converted the tables of crime points into point data, and then aggregated the data by population data and block groups. Then I used a cluster and analysis tool to analyze them for clusters, and then created map outputs for 2017 through 2023. And here is a map that for 2017. The areas of red indicate high clusters, which is significant areas of crime. The blue areas are low clusters, which indicate statistically significant lower areas of crime. The outskirts of Philadelphia had lower areas of crime, possibly due to more spread out population, whereas higher concentrations of population would more than likely indicate more crime. Um, Results. Sorry. Like I said, higher crime was in red in the inner city, lower crime in blue was in the outskirts. There was a shift in crime from 2017 to 2023. This map is from 2023, and you can see the crime moved a little bit more south. There's a large amount of not significant data in light gray, which indicates that the population or violent crime count data was too low to have any significant data. And the large blank areas are in industrial areas or airfields. Um, between 2017 and 2023, the uh, not significant areas in light gray increased a lot. Um, that could be uh, due to people moving out of an area or is more than likely due to people moving out of an area. There were an increase in blank areas as well, which probably indicates industrialization or new uh, commercial areas being created. And that's my project, and here's my sources. Any questions?
All right, Chris, thanks for your presentation. While we're waiting for some questions, I'll ask a general question here. So, yeah, you commented on the patterns and their changing distribution and so forth. What, if you were to kind of keep going with this, what kinds of perhaps factors or variables would you want to include to help explain these patterns?
So I this project only included population, like total population count. It would be a good idea to include socioeconomic data, um, things like race, age, obtained education, poverty level, maybe income, uh, housing value, that sort of thing, and track that change across the years, and that might help explain also the change in non-significant data and I suppose missing data, you could call it.
All right. Thanks for your response. There's two questions in the chat window for you.
Was there statistically significant change in the amounts of violent crimes in any tracked year to year? Um, I didn't look at the specific tracks. I was looking at the overall city. And then did you cluster the analysis on the points directly and N or Ripley's K? No, no, I didn't. And what made you want to look into crime data in Philly? The that project was born of a conversation that we had from friends, and it just kind of spiraled from there.
All right. Well, thanks for the responses, Chris. Why don't we go ahead and move forward here? I think Julie is up next.
Great. I'll share my screen. Can
All
you see
right.
the full
Yes,
presentation?
yes, we do. So you can begin whenever you want.
Okay, awesome. So my name is Julie Rotrammel. I'm currently a GIS and plant records specialist at the University of Michigan Botanical Gardens. And my capstone project is titled Tracking Species Occurrences Within High-Quality Natural Communities on Mathi Botanical Gardens and Nichols Arboretum Properties in Ann Arbor, Michigan, using GIS tools to streamline floristic quality assessments. So for this project, I created a geodatabase and two web tools that help track species occurrences within high-quality natural communities on MBGNA properties and utilize floristic quality assessment methods for the purpose of streamlining data collection, data viewing, and understanding better the floristic quality of our different sites. So the topic of my project is very specific to my field, and there's a lot of terms that I think are unfamiliar. So I'm going to begin with a few definitions. So the first concept that I want to introduce is just floristic quality assessment. This is a methodology designed to broadly assess floristic significance of a natural area. These assessments use coefficients of conservatism values to calculate a mean coefficient of conservatism and a floristic quality index metric from a list of plant species obtained from a botanical survey of a specific site. So these metrics are then used to better understand the floristic quality of sites and help practitioners make decisions. Coefficient of conservatism, which is also called C value or C values, is a value ranging from 1 to 10 that's assigned to each native species within a region. This project uses the Michigan Floristic Quality Database, which is a spreadsheet of plants found in the state. And then each species in that database is given a C value based on its likelihood of occurrence in a landscape most similar to that of pre-European settlement in Michigan. So species that can be found almost anywhere would receive a C value of 0 or 1. And then species that are almost always found in a remnant natural habitat, so more rare species, would receive a C value of 9 or 10. Non-native species are automatically assigned 0 values. And the mean coefficient of conservatism, or also called mean C, is calculated by adding together all the C values from a site's plant inventory and dividing by the total number of plant taxa represented. And that's the equation for that metric. Floristic Quality Index is another metric of a floristic quality assessment and is calculated by multiplying mean C by the square root of the total number of plants. So project goals were threefold. So first, I wanted to create a file geodatabase that contained feature classes for surveyed species points and natural community site polygons, and then two tables, one of the Michigan Floristic Quality Database, and the other table is a table of the surveyed taxa from each natural community site. The second goal is the creation of an ArcGIS Field Maps data collection tool, and that will be called the FQA Field Tool further on in this presentation. And this will allow adding data to the plant species point layer while in the field. And then the third goal is the creation of an ArcGIS dashboard, which will be called the FQA Data Dashboard. And this will allow end users to peruse data, view statistics, and update data from a desktop setting. And my project, as you can probably tell, is very application focused. So the goal of my background research and literature review was to explain the value of floristic quality assessments from a broader perspective of natural areas management. So natural areas management is just a very complicated and challenging field for many reasons. This makes it hard to easily assess a quality of a natural area. And there are often divergent objectives that have to be synergized, differing levels of risk that need to be incorporated into decision making, a lot of different types of needs that have to be balanced, and then incorporating data into decision making. And to make informed decisions, adequate and current data about a managed area is required. So assessment methods can be a valuable tool to help decision makers better understand chemical, physical, or biological makeup of an area and see changes over time. The original floristic quality assessment methodology that my project is based on was developed in the Chicago area. Its use has been adapted throughout the Midwest and beyond. And this is a means of assessing ecological quality and condition of natural areas. Despite many regions adopting the FQA as a tool for planning and decision making, there are a lot of valid criticisms. One of those is that these FQA indices are subjective because they depend on an expert assigning a C value. And those subjective assignments can actually make a difference in FQA indices, such as the mean C and the FQI. And then this all kind of is combined into a primary criticism of the FQA, and that's that we're distilling a natural system into a single value. So in answer to these critiques, it definitely is important to utilize FQAs in conjunction with other information sources. Incorporating FQA data into a GIS with other relevant layers could help to provide a fuller picture of site or ecosystem quality for decision makers. And now I'll talk about the different data layers that were used to meet project goals. So there were two standalone tables used in this project. First, on the left, the Michigan Floristic Quality Database table. This provides a listing of every species found in the state, and then their assigned coefficient of conservatism values, as well as other metrics useful in evaluating site quality, such as a wetness indicator status and physiognomy, which is like tree, vine, shrub. And then on the right here is the plant list table. This holds a record of all the plant species that were found in each natural community polygon during an initial survey of MBGNA properties back in 2012. And these two tables were given a one-to-one relationship using global ID fields during this file geodatabase creation. And then here on the left is the natural communities polygon feature layer. This delineates the boundaries of high quality natural community sites on each of the properties. This was given a one-to-many relationship with the plant list table that was on the previous slide. And then attributes for this layer will include a lot of fields for FQA metrics, and these are calculated from each site's plant inventory list. And then another layer being used is the notable plant point feature layer. So this will include point features for rare or notable plants that we want to know the specific locations of. This layer is the basis for the FQA field tool, but will also be featured in the dashboard. And then on the right is the MBGNA property boundaries polygon feature layer. This will just show the boundaries of the properties in the dashboard and the field tool. This isn't critical to the functionality of the tool by any means, but will provide a geographic reference for users. And you can see in this image in the green, those are the natural community polygons, and they don't span the entire length of the property. Not all of the space is high quality, so it's just going to provide a good reference for users to frame the site. All right, and now I'll talk about how the project took shape. So this capstone project was created for our natural areas curator and staff at MBGNA who are involved in land management decision making or are the ones surveying in the field. So there's several different types of needs that the tools had to address. So to figure out those requirements, I conducted a user analysis using scenario-based design and then followed that with a claims analysis. This allowed me to brainstorm different ways that users might interact with tools and then think about how those tools would need to be designed to realize the scenarios. And then the claims analysis helped determine the pros and cons of each design feature identified through those scenarios. The next step was to create a wireframe design of the FQA data dashboard. I didn't create one for the field tool just because that's a much more set list of dropdowns and features. So this wireframe helped determine the basic layout of the dashboard. It helped me figure out where design elements that were identified in the user analysis should be placed for visibility and accessibility, and then help me think through a user's flow within the design. And then when designing this tool, I was making an assumption that users would be using a desktop or a laptop with the dashboard and then a mobile device or tablet with the field tool. And so the wireframe reflected this assumption. And this slide is just showing one of the different wireframe screens. So then after this was created, it was shared with potential users for informal feedback, which was incorporated into the prototype design. And then a prototype was created for each of the two tools in the ArcGIS online environment. Um, the FQA field tool is shown here. This was configured in ArcGIS field maps. And then the FQA data dashboard was created in ArcGIS dashboards. The field tool can be utilized within the Field Maps app with a minimum of 10-meter accuracy. Ideally, it would be better. The form contains several domain dropdowns and an auto-calculated site ID, which links the record to the natural community in the FQA data dashboard. So now I'm going to hopefully share the prototype of the data dashboard so I can explain it a little better while showing. I'm gonna escape this and then okay, can we see this?
Yes, you're good.
Okay, awesome. All right, so this is the main view of the data dashboard with the primary map view zoomed out to encompass the two main MBGNA properties. So you can zoom in to individual polygons or filter the sites based on the floristic quality metrics of total FQI or total mean C, and those filters are up here. Um, the site details panel, which is located on the first tab over here on the right of the screen, is populated when a natural community is selected from the map. So I will select one here. I'm selecting the Radrick North Wetland Natural Community, and then you can see the individual metrics from the site on the side panel. So all the metrics listed within the panel were calculated in the web map editing form using ArcGIS Arcade, and they're based on the related plant list for each polygon. So when a plant is added to the plant list table, these metrics will change, dynamically reflecting the most current information available for a site. So the next tab is the plant list. This is just a really simple list of the plants that have been found within the selected natural community. And then the third tab, the plant points tab, displays any plant point that's found within the selected natural community. And you can, if there's a list, you can toggle through. This just has one, and you can view the plant details below. So the second screen of the dashboard is the plant list table. This is where users can edit existing information and add new plants to the plant list table. So the editing, you can click on any line and edit fields. And when I was creating the prototype, the limitations of the software to do what users wanted, and the things that were outlined in the claims analysis, this became a little more obvious. So users required the ability to add to the plant list for a natural community site, but there's no way to actually add new lines to a table directly within the dashboard interface. So I developed a solution to embed a Survey 123 form into the dashboard where users can enter just basic site and plant information. And based on this information, several hidden fields are calculated to fill out the remaining information that's stored in the table. So things like the C values and wetness, those are all pulled from the Michigan Floristic Quality Database table when someone selects the right scientific name. All right. So the time frame of the Capstone project was not long enough for me to carry out formal user testing of the prototypes, so this is an ideal next step for the project in order to better understand how the users interact with the tools, whether features are limiting or promoting user interaction, and how the tools can still be improved. So my idea is for 3 end users who represent the different user types to participate in this evaluation. Each user will be assigned to complete 3 tasks within the FQA data dashboard and the 4th within the FQA field tool, and those are shown here. And then once those tasks have been completed or attempted, they'll be asked to fill out a survey to provide quantitative and qualitative feedback about their experience. So I definitely want like a measurable scale of information, but also, descriptive feedback about the process. So once those results have been compiled, I'll have a better baseline understanding of the usability of the tools, and I can summarize it into actionable steps that will be incorporated into improvements. And then this is an iterative process that can be conducted anytime new features are added or anytime I have a new user type, so I can better understand how they would use the tools. So I've thought about several things that would improve the tools that I've made. Number one, updating plant nomenclature would fill in some data gaps. The plant list table was originally created in 2012, and that was using the flora of Michigan that was current at the time. Plant names are constantly being updated and revised based on new research. So names that are included in the 2024 Michigan FQA database may not match the plant list table entries from 2012. So the list should be verified for name updates and then edited. Another update that I would like to implement is currently, users can export filtered results in a CSV format, but I would like to include additional functionality enabling the export of formatted reports, combining site information, metrics, and a plant list in a more user-friendly view. And then finally, current setup of the natural communities calculations incorporates every taxa that has ever been found at a site. So I think it could be useful to be able to calculate a subset of taxa that have been found in like the last 10 years, for example, versus in the initial results incorporated previous surveys even that were from the 70s. So I think this ability would just allow practitioners to assess changes to a site rather than just understanding an overall floristic quality. And in conclusion, with these accessible and up-to-date tools, I'm hoping that curators and natural areas staff will be able to better understand the condition of the natural areas under their care and the conservation value of plants that live there. Until now, we've really only had access to static PDF lists and FQA metrics from at least a decade ago that are unable to be updated and difficult to access. So these tools are user-centered, and will allow staff to have a much larger role in the data collection, data editing, and planning their management action. So these are my references, and I'm happy to answer any questions.
All right, thanks, Julie. Great job. Looks like you have a question in the chat window.
Am I considering presenting it at a botanical conference or professional meeting? I probably not this year, but this is something that Dr. Kessler is asking us to think about, so I'll probably consider that. Yeah.
I have a quick question for you. So the FQAs, are these unique to a state? So in other words, if you'd cross over to Ohio, would they have a whole separate body of knowledge? And then how, if they are different, or I guess maybe even if they are similar, how would your system need to be adjusted for that?
Yeah. So yeah, FQAs, the databases depend upon a region or a defined geographic region. So I know there are lists that encompass single states, but there are also lists that encompass regions. If you did one for the whole United States, you would need someone to think about different taxa with regard to their existence in the full continent or like, I guess, political division of the country versus like some things in Michigan are considered quite rare and would get a high coefficient of conservatism, but in Ohio, maybe they're a lot more common. And so if we included Ohio in that assessment, the coefficients would have to change because we're now considering a whole nother region. So
So
that's why there's some of that subjectivity because there are different experts in different states that, based on their knowledge, might know more about part of a region, or a specific state. a little bit differently than someone else.
So it would take a little bit of work to make your system applicable to either outside your immediate study area, Michigan as a state, or beyond.
Yeah, I think you could just replace um, the floristic quality database table with a different state's table, and there are a lot of these databases that have been created now. So it might take a little bit of work, but it might actually not be as hard to do because there are these databases in other places.
All right. All right. Looks like you have another question.
Have I considered ethnobotanical relationships with local tribes? Yeah, this was not something that came up, during the course of my project, but I think this is a really interesting question, and it's always an interesting question when you're talking about pre-European flora, because it's a very specific dividing line, and there have been a lot of, we're not the only people who have affected change in floras. So, I think that would be an interesting thing to consider. I'm just not sure how you would incorporate it into this FQ. It's very like a rigid FQA system. I'd be interested if you had ideas.
All right. Julie, if you could put your contact info in the chat window in case
Uh-huh.
someone wants to follow up, that'd be great. And then, Michael, I think you are next up. So if you want to start sharing your screen, we'll get you all set.
Alrighty, sounds good. Give me 1 second here.
All right. So we see your slideshow and we can hear you. So whenever you're ready to begin, you can.
Okay, perfect. So hello everyone. My name is Michael, and for my final presentation is on evaluating the effects of fire on the spatial extent of southern seepage bogs. So a little bit about the project. Fire has been a natural part of the ecosystem of the southeastern United States for thousands of years. Evidence suggests that fire has a regular occurrence in the region before human intervention due to the regular dry seasons and frequent lightning storms. Anthropogenic fire effects can be found as far back as 10,000 years ago, as so many species native to the southeast region of the United States have evolved with fire, including the ecosystem of interest of this study, southern seepage bogs. However, due to a myriad of different reasons, the use of fire was removed or entirely suppressed across the United States, causing adverse effects on these delicate ecosystems. In the case of seepage bogs, without regular fire, shrubby vegetation that naturally dominates the lower stream beds encroach and eventually outcompete the native species that dominate the bogs above. However, due to a policy shift and a better understanding of these ecosystems, fire has now been reintroduced as a management tool across the United States, and nowhere is that more apparent in the Southeast. And that is the primary interest of this project. How has this reintroduction of fire affected these southern seepage bogs? And to answer this question, this project ran an object-based image analysis on 8 NAPE images collected from 2009 through 2023 over the Splinter Hill Bog Preserve in Baldwin County, Alabama, to track how that seepage bog specifically had changed over time. So the purpose of this project was to examine historic NAPE imagery of the Splinter Hill Bog Preserve in Baldwin County, Alabama, to see if a regular prescribed fire has increased the spatial extent of seepage bogs over a 14-year timeline. The objectives of the project were to perform an accurate object-based image analysis and then extract the bog features from the data collected. And then lastly, to generate accurate deliverables that show the extent to which the bog has changed over that 14-year timeline. A little bit of background on seepage bogs. They're also commonly known as pitcher plant bogs or seepage slopes. They're a rare ecologic phenomenon that occur in the southern coastal plain of the United States. How they occur is when groundwater from uphill pine forests move downhill over top of a permeable sandy layer but can't penetrate any deeper because there's an impermeable layer, normally of clay, underneath that. It causes that sandy layer to become highly saturated, very acidic, and very nutrient poor. So the plants that evolved in that area evolved to gather their nutrients through insects. And that's why they're always dominated by these rare pitcher plants that can really only be found in these seepage bogs. Along with the pitcher plants and other carnivorous plants, there are a myriad of other rare species that only live in these seepage bogs, but due to anthropomorphic effects, um, including the suppression of fire, there's only about 1% of these seepage bogs still intact in their original range. So a little bit about the preserve itself. Splinter Hill Bog Preserve is a 3,000 plus acre preserve owned by the Nature Conservancies, and it sits at the headwaters of the Perdido River in Baldwin County, Alabama. The preserve is made up of a scattering of upland longleaf pine forests that feed into Blackwater streams. The geography itself has created the conditions for seepage bogs to form, and through proper maintenance, has made them some of the most intact remaining along the Gulf Coast. And this bog in particular has the densest population of white top pitcher plants anywhere in the world. So this property was purchased back in 2010. Before the purchase, fire was minimally used. Just through like anecdotal conversations I had with the land manager, it was about 1 to 8 years they would perform a burn in the area. But now, since the Nature Conservancy has purchased the land, they perform a regular fire cycle of every 1 to 3 years. Per burn unit, making it an exceptional location to study the effects of fire over an extended period of time. The study area is made up of 2 separate burn units, burn unit 1A and 1B. If you look at the map that I provided, if you essentially split the study area in half, the western portion is 1A and the eastern portion is 1B. 1B is dominated by woody vegetation since it sits right along Dias Creek. And then 1A is the main pitcher plant bog and some scattered longleaf pine as well. The area in total has about 133 acres. So this slide just provides a couple hyperlinks to some of the literature that I looked at. Four of the most important ones when it came to what I was looking at. They mainly talk about how fire affects seepage bogs throughout the United States. I couldn't find anything that specifically looked at seepage bogs in Alabama, but they cover bogs all over the Southeast. And then the one I have highlighted there was of particular interest to me because Miller and Company's article looked at historic aerial imagery of grasslands in Missouri to see how the reintroduction of fire controlled woody encroachment, which is a very similar issue that seepage bogs are having in the South, this woody encroachment coming up from these stream beds. So this project aimed to build upon this existing literature by looking directly at how the incorporation of a consistent fire cycle affected the Splinter Hill seepage bog. So the data that was used for this project was predominantly NAPE imagery that was collected from 2009 to 2023 over a 3-year interval. NAPE data was selected as it provides the highest resolution data at a 1 meter GSD, and that's going as far back as 2009, which was very nice to have. NAPE data is also collected at the height of the growing season, which makes it easier to differentiate between woody vegetation and the bog vegetation, which is very useful for the later classification. Other relevant data was annual burn reports that was provided by the Nature Conservancy, describing all relevant information about the prescribed burns that year, when they were performed, what units were burnt, the acres consumed, and fire intensity. The Nature Conservancy also provided shape files of relevant burn units, and that's how I was able to build the study area, and then shape files of each tract of land within the Splinter Hill Bog Preserve of when they were purchased. So I got a rough idea of when they got the tract that I'm looking at for this project. If you look at the map, it's just a raw breakdown of each of the NAPE images that I used for this project. A is the 2009 NAPE imagery, B is 2011, and then following that down to H is the 2023 data. So here's a quick flow chart of how of the methods of how this project workflow went. In green, it is the pre-processing phase. In red was the processing phase. and then the blue was the analysis phase. Moving on to the pre-processing phase, it was all performed in ArcGIS Pro, where the nape imagery was reprojected to the state plane system for Alabama in US feet. All the nape images was clipped to the study area size. And then the decision was also made to resample the 2019 and 2023 nape data so that all the pixels were the same size. It just made the end analysis a little easier with the final math. Moving on to the processing phase, this was the bulk of the project. The majority of it was performed in eCognition. For those that don't know what eCognition is, it's a software produced by Tremble that is specifically used for remote sensing and mainly object-based image analysis. And what object-based image analysis is a two-step process where you first segment an image into classifiable objects, where eCognition is very good at this because it has a myriad of different algorithms that can help an analyst properly segment an image. And then for the sake of consistency with this project, I used 3 different algorithms to segment each image. It was quad tree, multi-resolution, and spatial difference. I used them in that order. If you want a little bit more information on those algorithms, I can provide them after the presentation. As the analyst, you're kind of looking for a Goldilocks zone with these when you segment an image. You don't want to over segment an image because it creates like a salt and pepper effect, and you don't want to under segment an image because then you get something called spillover where pixels are being classified as something that they really aren't. But once segmented, once you get to that point, you create an interpretation key. And essentially what an interpretation key is just a list of object feature values that give the analyst an idea of the range that each class, the values in each class. So hypothetically, the bog class has a range of different variables. You kind of collect all of those into one class and then move on to the next one. So for the classes used, I used 4 different classes. Bog, which is that mustard color in the pictures. Woody vegetation is the green. Sorry. Sand is the sand color. And then the gray is shadow. Similar to the segmenting phase, there's not like an easy way to do this. There's a lot of trial and error, just playing with the variables and adjusting the ranges until the analyst feels comfortable with what they've produced. Once all the images were classified, the like objects are merged together and then exported as a shapefile for further processing in ARC. In ARC, the vector files were converted back to a raster file, reclassified, and then had random points assigned to each of them to get an accuracy value, a blind accuracy value of each of the images. Finally, the analysis phase. This was relatively simple and small compared to the processing phase. Once all the points were classified, the accuracy values were inserted into a confusion matrix to find the user, producer, and overall accuracies of each of the classified image. If the bog class was below 90%, in either user or producer, the whole process had to be restarted because that was one of the key goals of this project was to produce accurate maps. So if they didn't hit that mark, it had to be restarted. But once all the images were accurately classified to the standards of the project, a change detection analysis was run to see how the bog acreage had changed over time. And then also to see if there was any statistically significant change. The bog acreage itself was run through a weighted linear regression model. Moving on to the results. The results of the accuracy assessment across the board met the standards of the project. The producer and user accuracy of all the bog classes were above 90%. Again, if they weren't, I went back and redid either the classification if need be. Another fun finding was that the overall accuracy of all the images were above 90%, except for 2019, which came in at 86% accurate overall accuracy. So the results of the change detection were very interesting. What was found was a large fluctuation in bog acreage throughout the 14-year timeline. We saw a severe dip in 2011 and 2020, or in 2013, a rebound in acreage in 2015 through 2017, and then a significant dip again in 2019, and then again rebounding in 21 and 23. The most significant decrease actually came from 2009 to 2011, where the acreage decreased by 42%, which was rather surprising because from my research, this is when the controlled burning started. Uh, the largest increase was from 2019 to 21, where they saw a 94% increase in the bog acreage. The results of the weighted linear regression test were also unexpected, as the final p-value came out to 0.598, which is well above the 0.05 indicator to reject the null, meaning that there was really no statistically significant change in the bog acreage over that 14-year timeline, meaning that the addition of the regular fire cycle really didn't increase the size of the bog over time. So some final thoughts on this project. Overall, the objective of the project, I believe, were met with the creation of accurate deliverables through the use of an object-based image analysis. However, the findings created more questions than answers for me regarding how the fire affects the extent of the bog over time. These findings actually fall more in line with some of the previous literature discussed earlier, like the one from Miller, where they found there was really no statistically significant change once fire was included. However, it doesn't mean that fire itself isn't good for the bog. There's plenty of research out there showing that regular fire does in fact at least keep the bog the same size. The biggest thing from this project that I will continue to look at and further research is why there was those large fluctuations in acreage over the 14-year timeline. If I can pinpoint the exact variables on why we saw those very large increases in bog size, we may be able to come up with a management method of strictly using fire to actually grow these southern seepage bogs. So that is everything. If anyone has any questions, here are my references. I'm all ears.
All right, Michael, thanks a lot. Great presentation. While we're waiting for questions to come up, I'll ask kind of a basic question here. Is fire the primary control of the bog, or are there other factors that could be at play here?
Um, so it depends on what bog you're looking at. For the Splinter Hill Bog Preserve, they only use fire as a management tool, at least from the last time I spoke with the land manager there. When I was working there in 21, they strictly used fire and hand tools for all of their land management. But other places have seen success in reducing the amount of like shrubby encroachment by using mechanical means or herbicide. But I do know that with the Nature Conservancy, they are really aiming to strictly use fire as the main management source, I guess.
All right. Well, thanks. It looks like you have two questions in the chat window.
Okay. Did you find out that? Okay. I might have missed this, but did you find out if the change from year to year in bog size was significant, even though the overall change didn't or wasn't? So no, I did not do I didn't find anything significant there, and it's because I didn't test for that. That would be something that later on I plan to possibly do some kind of post hoc test to see if there's significant change between each group, and I do believe that there would be something there. And then lastly, does the fire not release a large amount of CO2 into the atmosphere? Is this balanced out somehow? So yes, it does. It does release a large amount of CO2. However, using fire as a management tool is much better than not maintaining the environment and causing a lot of buildup of dead material, which would in turn cause large wildfires once they do finally erupt. Because again, these areas, have historically for thousands of years had regular fire moving through them. Everywhere in the world essentially has some kind of fire cycle or natural fire cycle, I will say. And taking that away just causes more damage to the system, to the ecosystems that evolved with it, either by being outcompeted by non-native species or causing a buildup of material that can become dangerous and cause massive wildfires.
All right. Well, thanks for your responses and your presentation. If you could put your contact information in the chat window, that'd be great.
All right, thank you.
And then up next, we have Sabrina. So if you want to go ahead and start sharing your screen, we'll get you all set up to go.
All right.
And we can see your slides, so whenever you're ready.
How do I put Zoom away so it's not in the way? Okay. Good afternoon, everyone. My name is Sabrina Zapson. I'm an MGIS student here at Penn State, and today I'll be presenting my proposed project for 596B, Spatial Determinants of Arrest Locations in Philadelphia, Analyzing Proximity to Key Urban Features. So there were over 80,000 reported crimes in Philadelphia in 2024, and several studies suggest that urban environmental factors and land use impact those crime rates. In this study, they'll be referred to as key locations and include things like vacant lots, schools, and transportation hubs. Key locations have been found to be associated with specific crime types, specifically transportation hubs. For example, bus stations, train stations, and other centralized hubs that large numbers of people move throughout the day have been found to be associated with drug-related crimes and arrests. Overall, prediction of crime based on urban and environmental factors varies city to city, but no standardized methodology to establish which key features have high impact on crime specific to each city currently exists. Most studies look at just one environmental factor or only violent crimes or only drug crimes. As mentioned, similar studies have been done in other major cities and located across the world, including in Australia, Sweden, and the United States. But all of them had different methodology and identified different key features or analyzed different crime types. While similar studies have been done in Philadelphia, they tend to focus only on specific types of key features or arrest types or something specific only to Philadelphia. This study includes key locations found to have impacts in studies outside of those done just in Philadelphia. And finally, when reviewing literature, many, if not all, studies analyze demographic data in addition to spatial, so poverty levels, anything other than just pure spatial data. This study intends to predict crime locations through a purely spatial perspective, so not using any of that census data. So the purpose of this project is to determine where different arrests are most likely to occur in Philadelphia based on proximity to key locations, as mentioned, previously identified to have influence over crime rates. The idea is if certain crime types, let's say vandalism, are consistently found to be within X meters of gas stations and Y meters from schools, and the orange circle here will have the gas stations and the blue circle the schools, then at the locations where these buffers overlap should be where most of those crime types occur. This forms predictor polygons of where specific crime types are most likely to occur, and ideally, the sum of the surface area of these polygons tract to tract should have a direct relationship with the amount of associated arrest types that occur there. This does not mean arrests or crime will occur at every predictor polygon, though the fact that arrest data is being used for this study means that crime could still be occurring there even if no one is getting caught. If this study proves successful, then further research into why some polygons have more arrests than others, perhaps the presence of security measures, could be studied. Regardless, there should still theoretically be a linear relationship between the surface area of these polygons in each tract and the amount of the given associated type of arrest in each tract. The methodology of this project is broken into two parts, part one being what has already been done, and part two being what I intend to do in 596B. Part one includes identification of arrest types and key locations and the gathering of the data, performing a near analysis on the arrest types to the surrounding key locations, and the determination of the buffer sizes that will be used to form the predictor polygons. Part two would include actually overlapping the buffers to create those predictor polygons in ArcGIS Pro and finding the relationship between arrests and surface area of the predictor polygons. Arrest data for 2024 was taken from Open Data Philly and organized into 30 arrest types, with the category of all other offenses being left out. Then global Moran's I values were used to remove any arrest type with random spacing, and any arrest type with less than 100 cases were also excluded at the tract level. And the Ripley's K analysis indicated statistically significant departures from complete spatial randomness for all of the remaining arrest types, which were used in the study. So these are the ones that were removed and resulted in just these remaining. So these are all the arrest types used in my study. Literature identified a large number of potential key locations that were difficult to get data for, including ATMs and alcohol outlets, which would likely be used in future versions of this study in other cities if the data is available. But SEPTA was able to provide me shapefiles on various major transportation hubs, including bus stations, subway stations, trolley stations, and regional rail stations. Vacant buildings, lots, schools, and police stations location data was obtained via Open Maps Philly, and all potential gas station locations were marked via Google Maps and ArcGIS Atlas, and each location was checked individually using satellite data and Google Street View to form the gas station location data set. This data was then put into a near analysis table that shows the closest of each key location type to each arrest. So for each arrest type in orange, the whole table, in this case being aggravated assault with firearm, there is a column for each location type in green. Near analysis performed in R gave the distance of each arrest type in meters to the closest of each key location type in meters. So for example, if in that box now highlighted in red, that would be under the vacant building column of aggravated assault, and it would be the first case of aggravated assault looked at. That occurred 6.66 meters away from the nearest vacant building. From there, outliers were removed using Tukey's adjusted outlier test, and the skew in Z for each skew was found to determine the distribution of the data for each column. I was not expecting to have so many normally distributed data sets, leading to the revisions of how the buffers were formed, as I will discuss in a moment. For the sake of the study's goals, normality was not determined in a statistical test, only based off skew values. Cases with no normal distribution or strong skew were removed, as well as any column found insignificant based on the Z value, though there were none in the case of aggravated assault with firearms. And this gives us the key locations that had some sort of strong relationship with each arrest type. In the case of aggravated assault with firearms, this was vacant buildings, vacant lands, regional rail stations, subway stations, gas stations, and police stations. This resulted in every column either having a significant normal distribution as seen in purple or a strong positively skewed distribution as seen in blue. None of them had a negative skew. Regardless, the histograms here show the number of arrests within bins of distance from the key locations. This means that if we put these key locations to the left, we can get the distribution away from them. Since the x-axis is the distribution from key locations and the bird's eye view of the distributions would look something like this, on normally distributed sets, arrests should mostly occur at a specific distance away from key locations, not necessarily close, not necessarily super far, but in the same range in a donut shape. On skewed sets, the majority of arrests should occur close to the key location. And using the empirical rule on normally distributed data, within 2 standard deviations of the mean, there should be 95.45% of the data, in this case, arrests. These boxes drawn here are just for the sake of presentation and not calculated. On skewed data, because it's distance away and we cannot have negative data there, the adjusted box plot method was used to mark the 95.45th percentile of the data, meaning that all buffers created should contain 95.45% of arrests, regardless if it is normal or skewed. And now we have our buffer sizes. Oh, and here we can see the donut shape that was not previously used in my initial proposal, but now we have them. In part two, that would be the actual spatial analysis and finding the overlaps in the buffers and finding the yeah. First, to determine if arrests are actually occurring within the predictor polygons or not can be done by calculating the percentage of arrest types occurring within versus outside of these polygons. In a scatter plot where each point is a tract, one axis is the surface area of these polygons within the tract, and the other is the amount of given arrest types at a tract, we should get a positive linear slope. And if this positive linear relationship is successfully found, then a regression model can be made to predict where arrests are most likely to occur based on the total surface area of the predictor polygons within each tract, and then this model can be tested on other years. The hypothetical results of this would be which key locations have a spatial relationship with any given crime type. For example, finding that transportation hubs have a spatial connection to drug arrests in Philadelphia, since that changes city by city. The next would be that based on the relationship and analysis of the regression model, if the methodology was accurate in predicting arrest locations in Philadelphia. And lastly, if a significant number of arrests actually occur within specifically the predictor polygons, which leads to the significance. If these arrests do occur within these polygons, then we can increase surveillance at these specific locations, and that could in turn help lower crime. Predictor polygons are hotspots for crime based on spatial distribution of urban elements. This means that if it's found correct, the city planning could help reduce the creation of more of these polygons or hotspots with proper planning and placement of urban features. And lastly, if the regression model is proven accurate, the same methodology can be used on other cities to do the same for them. The general timeline for 596B, I could only identify 4 conferences, 3 of which had application deadlines before the start of Fall 2, as I'll show in a moment. Prior to 596B, or as of today, based off of the syllabus for 596B, here is what has been completed already. Here, the conference applications that occur have deadlines before the beginning of 596B, and here is what I'm hoping to have done by the start of 596B. So the majority of the analysis and creation of visuals and maps should be done by February 25th, 2026. Here is the week-by-week timeline, if anyone cared about that. And includes when the last application for a conference would be due and the 4 conference dates. Because of the spacing of the conference dates, I did prioritize the finishing of the professional presentation rather than of the final manuscript. These are my sources, and do you have any questions?
All right, Sabrina, thanks for your great presentation. Looks like you've got a question in the chat window.
Yes. Have you also thought about how arrests might change between weekdays versus weekends, before school versus after school, or day versus night? Absolutely, that was considered when I was originally coming up with this project idea, but because I'm looking at it from purely a spatial perspective and I'm looking over the course of an entire year, the temporal aspect isn't as relevant to where they're happening. That would be further study.
One sort of future question for you is that, assuming all this pans out the way that you hope, how have you thought about sharing this with um, police officials in the area to maybe get their input and communicate with them what your findings suggest.
I've been in contact with both SEPTA, which for those who are not familiar is they run transportation for Philadelphia and public transportation, and the DA's office at Philadelphia, and some members of the DA's office have expressed interest in the results of this research should it prove successful. And the police department has not gotten back to me at all yet, but I have tried reaching out to them as well. Oh, and SEPTA, yeah, they've also mentioned that they were interested to see if there was any relationship between crimes and the locations of their transportation hubs to see if they should increase security around specific transportation hubs, like adding security cameras to bus stations.
Yeah, I'm sure they would be interested, most definitely.
I was specifically asked to not like make them look bad and to tell
Yeah,
them first.
I'm sure.
Hmm.
All right. Great job. If you could put your contact info in the chat window, that'd be helpful if someone wants to contact you with a follow-up question. And our final presenter for today, Benjamin. So if you want to go ahead and start sharing your screen, we'll get you all set up.
Okay.
Great. We can see your,
Everybody can see that?
yeah, we can see it and we can hear you, so you can begin when you want.
Okay. I'm Ben Zandarsky. I'm the Fort Carson Cultural Resource Manager. Today I want to talk about machine learning, predictive model for prehistoric site potential in the Pinyon Canyon Maneuver Site. This project evaluates whether ensemble machine learning methods can improve archaeological predictive modeling at the Pinyon Canyon Maneuver Site. Using PCMS as a case study, I examined model performance, spatial transferability, and interpretability in an archaeological landscape context. Archaeological predictive modeling is not just a theoretical exercise. It operates within real-world constraints. In the United States, federal agencies are required to consider the effects of their actions on archaeological and historic resources, which creates a need to evaluate large areas efficiently and consistently. Predictive models provide a way to prioritize where attention is most needed, helping focus survey and review efforts rather than replacing them. At a basic level, archaeological impact assessment is about the spatial overlap between two things: where activities occur and where archaeological sites exist. The left side of this diagram represents the types of undertakings: construction, training, infrastructure, and other land uses. The right side represents the distribution of archaeological sites across the landscape, which includes a wide range of site types. The key concept linking these is the area of potential effect, or APE, which defines where an activity could cause effects, not necessarily where sites are already known. Predictive modeling is useful here because it helps characterize archaeological sensitivity within the APE, especially in areas that have not been exhaustively surveyed. Before we talk about prediction, I want to briefly ground what the data actually represents. In southeast Colorado, archaeological survey is conducted through systematic pedestrian survey. Trained archaeologists walk the landscape along parallel transects, typically spaced about 20 meters apart, visually inspecting the ground surface for evidence of past human activity. What's important here is that the survey is not random exploration. It's structured, repeatable, and designed to maximize surface coverage under known visibility constraints. During survey, archaeologists record both artifacts and features. Artifacts are portable objects such as stone tools or debitage. Features are non-portable evidence like hearths, architectural remains, or rock art panels. These observations are spatially referenced in the field and later compiled into site records. Importantly, not every transect produces observations, and not every observation results in a site. When sufficient artifacts or features are observed, archaeologists define a site boundary. This boundary reflects the observed surface extent of cultural material, not necessarily the full extent of past activity or subsurface deposits. And after roughly 40 years of continuous pedestrian survey at the Pinyon Canyon Maneuver Site, we end up with something like this. Each polygon represents a recorded archaeological site identified through ground survey. What this map shows is not a prediction yet, but a cumulative outcome of decades of fieldwork across a large and environmentally diverse landscape. Methodological foundations. So first, decades of work in archaeological predictive modeling show that environmental and landscape variables meaningfully structure where sites occur. That pattern has been demonstrated broadly and specifically at the Pinyon Canyon Maneuver Site. Second, I used tree-based ensemble machine learning methods, random forest and XGBoost, because they are well suited to capturing nonlinear relationships that are common in the archaeological landscape data. Finally, recent work in spatial prediction emphasizes that traditional random cross-validation can produce overly optimistic results. To address this, I use spatial cross-validation, so model performance is evaluated across environmentally distinct regions rather than nearby locations. This slide explains the response variable used in the model. Decades of systematic pedestrian survey at PCMS give us a verified surface where archaeologists have explicitly confirmed both site and non-site areas. I converted this survey history into a binary raster at 10-meter resolution. Each pixel inside the surveyed area is labeled either site or non-site, while areas that were never surveyed are left as no data and excluded from the training. This step is important because it transforms field observations into machine-readable training surface, while preserving the distinction between absence of evidence and absence of survey. In other words, the model is not guessing where sites might be. It's learning from places where archaeologists actually have walked and made observations. To describe the landscape at each pixel, I start with a 10-meter digital elevation model from the USGS 3-depth program. From this DEM, I derive a set of terrain variables: slope, aspect, curvature, terrain ruggedness, to capture how steep, uneven, or topographically complex the landscape is. These variables are not arbitrary. In archaeological context, terrain strongly influences movement, visibility, drainage, and where people choose to camp or build or travel. In addition to terrain, access to water is one of the most consistently important factors in prehistoric settlement decisions. To represent this, I use hydrologic data from the National Hydrography Dataset, which maps stream networks across the Pinyon Canyon Maneuver Site. Streams were classified by type: perennial, intermittent, and ephemeral, and by stream order, allowing the model to distinguish between major river systems and smaller seasonal drainages. Springs and water bodies were also recorded. From these networks, I calculated Euclidean distance to water, which provides a continuous measure of proximity rather than a simple presence-absence. In addition to terrain and water, soils provide important information about surface stability and long-term land use. For this study, soil data were obtained from the Surgo database maintained by the USDA. Rather than using the full categorical complexity of Surgo, I simplified these data to texture-based variables that capture broad differences in surface conditions relevant to site formation and preservation. This slide shows how all of the data I just described are brought together into a single modeling framework. Rather than treating archaeology, terrain, hydrology, and soil separately, each data set is processed through a standardized pipeline. All layers are projected, resampled, and aligned to a common 10-meter grid. The result is a unified 10-meter predictor stack where each pixel contains consistent set of environmental values and a corresponding site non-site label. This structure allows the random forest and XGBoost models to learn relationships between landscape variables and site occurrence in a way that is spatially explicit and reproducible. This slide shows how model performance was evaluated using spatial cross-validation. Rather than randomly splitting pixels into training and testing sets, the study area was divided into 4 geomorphic regions: the plains, the canyons, the hogback, and the northern hills. In each iteration, the model is trained on 3 regions and tested on the 4th. This means the model is asked to predict site locations in landscapes it has never seen during training. This approach provides a much stricter test of model transferability and avoids overly optimistic accuracy estimates that can arise from spatial autocorrelation. Before getting into the results, I want to emphasize that both models were trained on the same predictor stack using the same response surface, resolution, and spatial cross-validation scheme. The only difference between them is the learning algorithm itself, random forest versus gradient boosted trees. So differences in performance reflect how each model generalizes across space, not differences in data or pre-processing. Under spatial cross-validation, both models perform above random, but performance is modest, which is expected given the difficulty of predicting archaeological site locations across heterogeneous landscapes. XGBoost consistently outperforms random forest with a higher mean rock AUC and improved recall across folds. More importantly, XGBoost shows greater stability across geomorphic regions, indicating stronger spatial generalization when the model is asked to predict in landscapes that it has not previously seen. In archaeology, missing a site has a different consequence than falsely flagging an area that turns out to be empty. For that reason, recall, the ability to successfully capture known sites, is often more meaningful performance measure than overall accuracy or even rock AUC alone. For the final predictive surface, I used the XGBoost model. This decision is based on its stronger and more stable performance under spatial cross-validation compared to random forest. What you're seeing here is a continuous probability surface representing the model's estimate of archaeological site likelihood across the surveyed portions of the Pinyon Canyon maneuver site. Higher values indicate areas that share environmental and landscape characteristics with known site locations, while lower values reflect areas that consistently differ from those conditions. Importantly, this surface is not a site map, it is a spatial expression of relative likelihood learned from the training data. These probability classes are derived by applying explicit thresholds to the continuous XGBoost probability surface. The thresholds convert model output into high, medium, and low probability classes for interpretive purposes. They do not represent true site presence or absence, nor are they intended as optimal decision thresholds. Instead, they provide a structured way to examine how model confidence varies spatially and how different portions of the landscape relate to the training data. In archaeological context, thresholding is necessarily conservative. Lower thresholds increases recall and reduces the risk of missing sites, at a cost of expanding the area classified as potential. Raising thresholds does the opposite. This trade-off is unavoidable and must be evaluated relative to research and management goals. So, at this stage, evaluation shifts from pixel-level accuracy to site-level coverage, which is a scale that matters operationally in archaeology. When probability outputs are classified into high and medium classes, 93% of known sites intersect those areas. When restricted to high probability class alone, 76% of known sites are still captured. This reflects a deliberate emphasis on recall. The model is designed to minimize risk of missing sites, even if that means accepting larger areas of uncertainty. Coverage is assessed at the site level, not the pixel level, because archaeological sites are spatially extended entities rather than point observations. This figure shows SHAP values from the XGBoost model, which help us interpret which environmental variables most strongly influence predicted site probability. What stands out immediately is proximity to water, particularly intermittent drainages, springs, and the Purgatoire River system, which consistently exert the strongest influence on model output. An important nuance here is that some of these features, especially springs, are relatively rare across the landscape. However, when they do occur, the model assigns them disproportionate explanatory weight. We complemented SHAP interpretation with recall evaluated by site type. That analysis shows strong performance for habitation-related sites, but lower recall for isolated rock art panels and burials. Notably, rock art sites are more likely to be captured when they occur alongside other site types, suggesting these features are often secondary or tertiary expressions within broader settlement systems. Taken together, these results suggest that the model is effectively learning environmentally structured settlement behavior, while predictably struggling with site types whose placement reflects social or symbolic factors not encoded in environmental predictors. This slide summarizes the limits and intended use of the model. First, the model performs best at identifying habitation-related archaeological sites that are well represented in the existing record. In contrast, isolated rock art panels and burial contexts are both underrepresented in the training data and not reliably captured by the model. It is also important to emphasize that only environmental and survey-derived variables were included. Cultural, symbolic, ethnographic, and traditional knowledge variables were intentionally excluded and are not implied by the results. Finally, the outputs of this model are intended to support survey prioritization and risk reduction. To conclude, this research demonstrates that environmental variables combined with ensemble machine learning methods can meaningfully model archaeological site probability across the Pinyon Canyon maneuver site when evaluated under spatial cross-validation. Among the tested approaches, XGBoost generalized more consistently than random forest across distinct geomorphic regions, supporting its use in landscape scale probability mapping and in heterogeneous environments. When probabilities are classified, the model captures the majority of known habitation-related sites, providing a defensible basis for survey prioritization and targeted resurvey planning. Finally, it is important to reiterate that these outputs are designed to inform risk reduction and decision support. They are not determinations of site presence, absence, eligibility, or survey adequacy, but a tool to help focus limited survey effort more effectively. And here are my references.
All right, Benjamin, thanks a lot. Great presentation. Looks like you have a question already in the chat window.
Yes, so the goal now is to use the model out of the box on unsurveyed areas in Pinyon Canyon, and we have some known sites in there that were just traditionally known. So it will give us some indication, and then to apply the model at Fort Carson proper, which is another 130,000 acre site or area installation. So that's the goal, to replicate this easily in different areas. It gets a little messy archaeologically when you leave. So Fort Carson and the Pinyon Canyon maneuver site exist in this archaeological context area. So not only cultural traditions are the same, but archaeological traditions are the same. How people recorded sites, what they did. Once you step out of that, it gets really messy. So that would be the ideal situation, but quite the hurdle, I guess.
I have a question. You and I kind of touched on this during the first part of your proposal process, but one of the questions that I raised was the suggestion that you're dealing with a landscape that's in the present, and then these sites were thousands or if not longer years ago where the landscape was likely to be different. So maybe for the good of the audience, you could comment on some of the rationalizations that you put forward on that question.
Yeah, so we don't see archaeologically, and it's supported by the literature. These variables are used consistently, and you don't see dramatic change until you get into the Paleolithic. And then that's a whole field, another discipline. So Paleolithic landscape reconstruction is out of the scope of this project. Things do change, but given my recall and especially the springs, the importance of springs, I think it's pretty consistent with how people may have operated in the landscape.
All right, I think we might have lost you there.
Oh, can you hear me?
Can now. Yeah, you cut out for a little bit. The last thing you said was the landscape.
Oh yeah. So the model like doesn't attempt to reconstruct past environments. It leverages stable landscape features that remain informative despite environmental change. So it acts as a proxy. So there always is that consideration that, a obviously intermittent drainage may have changed or but that's the data that we have.
All right. Well, thanks so much, Benjamin, for your responses. And I'd like to thank all the presenters today. Great job on all fronts. Thanks to the audience that showed up and asked questions. We have one more presentation session. That'll be tomorrow, same time at the Zoom link. So hope to see everyone there, and we will uh, have a good rest of the day.